Hello again, my name is Omar Santos. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to hack the OWASP Juice Shop. And this is the first video of a series of 2 videos that I'm going to create on this topic. So let's get started. So in this screen, I already logged into Websploit as a user called Omar in here. And I'm going to go and run a lot of these commands as root. So I'm going to do a sudo -i, and I'm going to put my password. And then now we're in a root prompt. One thing that I want to highlight is that I did not start the Docker service by default whenever you boot Websploit. And that's so you don't expose the Docker containers that are, of course, include a lot of intentionally vulnerable applications by default, right, and expose them to the rest of your network. So to start the Docker service, you can use the service docker start command. In my case, I already had Docker service, it was already started. And there are a few ways you can do or can verify if the Docker service, of course, is running. By default, in my configuration and in the VM, all the containers will start as soon as you start the Docker service. So you can do a docker ps, and then you see that all the containers are running, right? Now the formatting is a little bit, awkward in here because of my resolution and so on. However, I also have a script that comes with Websploit that is called containers.sh, right? If I execute that script, you actually have 2 sections. Now the section that you see highlighted here, so the top section, allows you to see what are the vulnerable containers that come with Websploit and their associated export or exposed ports. Now this is what is supposed to be running, and what you see down here is what is actually running on the system, right? So in other words, if you see that perhaps a container crash or you have to restart it, just verify that they actually match the list that you have up here, right? So they all will start from port 8881 all the way to port 8888. Right? Now in this week and next week as well, we're gonna be using Juice Shop, right? And as you see here, Juice Shop is supposed to be running on port 8882, and we can verify it here, right? So you see the name of the container, Juice Shop, and that port 8882 is associated to the port 3000 inside of the container. And of course, you can see the other ones down below. So now that we know that we have to connect to port 8882 to interact with Juice Shop, I'm going to open my web browser. Then once I'm there, I can go to 127.0.0.1 on port 8882, and you see that the intentionally vulnerable application called Juice Shop is now, started. And basically what this is a fictitious shop, in this case selling juices in here. And then you're going to be interacting with this application to find tons of different vulnerabilities, right? Now, one of the first thing that you have to find is a scoreboard. And basically, this environment, or the Juice Shop, is a capture the flag-like environment. And if you're not familiar with capture the flags, there are different exercises and competitions in many different conferences and other security gatherings, across the world, and of course, all of them, they have these scoreboards, so you can track not only your progress but who's actually winning the competition. In this case, of course, you don't have to compete against anybody else, but let's actually try to find that scoreboard which is hidden, and then you can actually unveil a lot of other exercises that are within the environment. Now, to look for that scoreboard, first thing that I will actually do is to either view the page source or inspect a specific element in here, right? And then basically by using the developer tools and the inspector, I can do things as easy as Control F to find something. And then here I can actually just put score to see if there's any other reference to perhaps a scoreboard. And you see that, it's catching up like underscore. And if I do it again, See that there's a scoreboard menu visible, huh? So in this case, you actually see an href to scoreboard in here. So what if I actually go and copy that, the inner HTML, and then in here, actually I don't even have to copy it. I can just from there type it, score, if I can type it correctly, there you go, scoreboard, and there you go. This is actually the scoreboard. You were able to find the scoreboard very easily. That was our first exercise. So that's too easy, right? But let me actually walk you through all the different exercises in here, or at least the majority of them. And you know, I'm gonna give you a lot of homework. Even 2 days, you know, and 30 minutes each day, we will not be able to solve everything in here, which is actually pretty good, because I'm gonna leave you several exercises as homework for you. But one thing that I want to highlight is that you can see the difficulty of each of the exercises. So these are divided by stars, right? So you know, I clicked on all of them in here, and I unveil different exercises, and the higher the number of stars, the more difficult the exercise will be, right? And you see that there are tons of different exercises, including things like Crosssite scripting, Crosssite request forgery, XXE or XML extended entities. You have, you know, I mentioned Crosssite request forgery, several Easter eggs, you know, even steganography exercises as well, right? So as you see, you know, it gets a little bit more complicated as you actually progress and you look for these exercises. Now, one thing that I want to highlight, let's actually start with a couple of them that are fairly easy here. And as a matter of fact, they even give you the strings to look for some of these vulnerabilities. So I'm going to highlight what is a Crosssite scripting, or you will see it referred to as XXS, right? And there are different types of Crosssite scripting. There's reflected Crosssite scripting, and reflected means that at the end of the day, you know, a vulnerability that is a Crosssite scripting vulnerability attacks the user, right? It is a vulnerability in a web application. So I'm going to draw here a web application, and here's a user, and of course I'll draw here an attacker. Now what the attacker is going to be looking is for an input validation issue, in this case what we call a Crosssite scripting, where it will allow him or her to inject JavaScript or any other types of, you know, mostly it's actually JavaScript, to be able to either redirect this user to a malicious site. So whenever he goes to the specific URI or URL to that web application, it can be redirected to a malicious website. I'll put here M for short. Or the attacker can also steal the cookies, right, from their browser or the session ID, and then, you know, be able to do things like session hijacking and session writing type of attacks, right? It can also pop up windows, and that's what you're gonna see in a few minutes, to interact with the user and potentially get, you know, sensitive information. And of course, you know, can do many other manipulations in the user's browser as well, right? So the reflected Crosssite scripting is not persistent, right? Now there's another type of Crosssite scripting which is stored, and I'll draw it in here. And then basically the vector for the Crosssite scripting, or the actual attack, is, just like the word says, stored in a database, right? Or it can be in a file, depending on the application. Now in this case, we're gonna be looking for a couple of Crosssite scripting vulnerabilities in here. Let's actually go and try to look for the DOM-based Crosssite scripting, which, by the way, is the third type of Crosssite scripting, and is also a reflected Crosssite scripting, but in this case manipulating the DOM of JavaScript. And this is actually something that is very common in single page applications. So as you can see in the screen, right, they even give you the string to actually look for in Juice Shop for any type of vulnerabilities, any type of Crosssite scripting vulnerabilities. Now in this case, another thing that I failed to mention is that cross-site scripting is an input validation vulnerability, but it can be found in any type of forms, right? So anything that the user will actually insert, some data, or of course any input like URLs and forms, and also hidden fields, and also HTTP headers, right? Now, what do we have in front of us? It's pretty simple. There's a search screen or a search. Now, what do we have in front of us? Well, there's a search field in here, and if I actually paste that script alert.xss, basically, is injecting this cross-site scripting tag, or basically just the name for the cross-site scripting vulnerability. However, in the real world, you can put in here any type of cross-site or any type of JavaScript, right? And of course, taking out the alert. But if you want to actually get the cookie of the user and so on, right? So what do we have in front of us? Basically, we have a search field where we can enter some input. So if I paste the script, tag with the alert, JavaScript, basically in this case, the attacker, or in my case, me as a pen tester, I'm trying to pop up a window or a dialog box in the user screen, and then if I'm successful, it was gonna say cross-site scripting or XSS, right? And in many different, traditional pen test, a lot of pen testers actually, take a screenshot of this type of, pop-up windows, and then they put them to the report. But in the real world, how you want to actually take advantage of these cross-site scripting attacks is by injecting a specific, JavaScript code in here to do things like, redirecting to a website without the user even knowing, right? Or by, as I mentioned to you before, stealing cookies and so on, right? But let's verify. Well, you see that in here, as soon as I actually hit enter, or you can click search, you get the pop-up message cross-site scripting, right? Or XSS in this case, that's for short. And you see that we actually just, got some recognition for solving, the cross-site scripting exercise, right? And in that case, it's a DOM-based cross-site scripting, which is a type of reflected cross-site scripting attack. Now, another thing that I want to highlight is, of course, I did alert XSS. I can type anything, like Omar is here, and then, all that information, all that, or that text will be displayed on the screen, right? As you see here. So, but again, in many cases, you can perhaps, enter some text saying your authentication has expired, or your password has expired. Please, log in or relog in, or, redirect them to a URL so the user can put sensitive information, right? So the sky's the limit. There's tons and tons and tons of different ways that you can perform cross-site scripting. And by the way, if you go to the hacker.org website, and if you click on the GitHub repository, which is my GitHub repository, under web application testing, I have a markdown page called XSS vectors. If you click on there, there's a collection of cross-site scripting vectors, and there are hundreds of them, that will help you obfuscate your technique. And as I mentioned, XSS or cross-site scripting is an input validation vulnerability. So most modern frameworks, web development frameworks, or web application firewalls, what we call WAF, right? And I'll draw it here. Those try to strip out or filter anytime that you see, a script tag, as I'm highlighting in the screen, or many other type of scenarios. Now, the list that I have in here is a lot of obfuscation techniques that you can use to bypass these security controls like a web application firewall. So another thing that I want to highlight is that in order for you to interact with the application, just like if you were going to buy one of these items in here, you need to have a login, right? And to create a user, and by the way, you don't have to put your personal information. You can put a fictitious user. You can go to login and then not yet a customer. And in there, you can actually put an email address. I'm going to put just user1@example.com. And then I'm going to put some type of password. And then for the security, a question, you can put, anything. And I'm just going to put anything for the mother's maiden name. And in there, of course, I just saved it here. In the real world, I don't say passwords, but, just for simplicity here, so I can log in, I will do that. So user1@example.com, and then my password is there. So now I am in the application, right? Now, let's actually go back to the scoreboard and see what other things we can actually find, right? And by the way, actually, we didn't find the Crosssite Script in tier 0. And, since they gave us the string, might as well, I'm going to copy it, right? But again, in the real world, you're going to be using your own vector, and I show you a whole bunch of different vectors, before. Now, as I mentioned, cross-site scripting not only is present or can be present in forms, but also in hidden fields or URLs, right? And specifically, the URLs that probably will accept some type of input, right? So if I go back to the Juice Shop in here, and I click on, let's say, one of the items, right? You actually see that I can put the items, somewhere in my basket, or I can view the item itself, right? And I get additional information. Now, if I put this in my basket, right, you see that, my URL actually didn't change. So I want to look for something that will cause my URL to actually change, right? And probably we can go over, different places in here, like track orders, right? By the way, track orders looks like has an input in here. So let's copy and paste this in here. And there you go. We found a cross-site scripting. But by the way, all these cross-site scripting tags, in some cases, you will see them as input in the URI, right? So a real attacker may actually just send a URI to a user, right, that is obfuscated, and it will redirect them to this legitimate site, right? So assuming that this is a legitimate site, and then from there, it can actually do any type of operations and probably, redirecting them to a malicious site or stealing the cookies and so on, right? So that's actually the power of cross-site scripting. And one thing also to highlight about cross-site scripting is that the attacker has to perform a little bit of level of social engineering to convince the user to actually follow, that specific link and so on, right? All right, so let's go back to the scoreboard. Now we actually have a few items actually solved in here. Actually, we didn't go to the first one, right? So the admin section. So we already know that there's a scoreboard. So similarly, we can probably try to find an administrator, basically space. So you can try to do this manually, just like admin in here, and that didn't work, right? Let's say administrator. That didn't work. What about administration? Let me type that in here. And that's what it is. There's an administration site that we just solved. Now, this was completely brute force, and I'm kind of cheating. I already know that administration is actually the command in there. You can use tools like Nikto, and that's one that I'm going to highlight in here, right? That you can launch a scan, right? And Nikto is a scanner. It's a web application penetration testing scanning that you can launch it to a specific URI, right? So in this case, you can actually point it to, let's see what the IP address that we have configured here. So we can do an IP-C bre a, and 10.6.6.04 is the IP address. Of course, we're doing this in my local host. We can do 127.0.0.1 if we wanted to, but just for simplicity here, let's actually do nicto-h and 10.6.6.104. And then, of course, in our case, I forgot the HTTP. So the complete URL. And then in this case, on port 8882, right? So this is actually running an automated scan, and it's gonna look for many different types of directories and many different things in there. I'm actually gonna stop this because I don't want to solve, and I think that I already did. I solved a couple of things in here probably by just running that scan. And let's see the scoreboard. Hopefully not. Oops, went to the GitHub repository. But let's go to the scoreboard in here. And no, it didn't solve it. So I'm gonna walk you through all these, some of these exercises by hand, right? Because I don't want you to become a script kiddie and just run a tool and it will automatically search for all these things for you. However, in the real world, of course, if you're doing a pen test, you want to automate as much as possible, right? And you want to do scanners, you want to do a lot of automated scans and a lot of automated attack, vectors. But to learn, what I always strongly recommend is not only for you to, do this somewhat manually, but also to even collect packet captures so you can actually see what the protocols are actually doing, right? In this case, HTTP. But let's say you were doing this to a specific IoT protocol like Modbus or Insteon or ZigWave. In that case, to learn those type of protocols, you want to collect packet captures and deep dive, right? And later, in other videos, we may actually go further, and you're gonna see packet captures. You're gonna see a lot of different ways that we can manipulate the device to find vulnerabilities like buffer overflows, input validation vulnerabilities like SQL injection, and so on. All right, in here, let's solve one more in the one category or the 1-star category. And this one is to give a devastating 0-star feedback to the store, right? So earlier you actually saw, that several options are in the top, right? You have recycle, contact us, and so on. And then you see a complaint, device in here, but this is actually a create a devastating 0-star feedback. So let's see complaint. What that does is a message only. But what about contact us? And that's where the feedback, comes in. So you see an author, in my case, is already using the email that I created or that for the user that I created a few minutes ago. And then in the comment, I can put, anything in here. So this is a comment. And then what it's asking me to do is do a negative feedback, right? So how will I be able to do a negative feedback if I can, I can only select 1 star. I cannot go negative. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5, right? So in order for you to manipulate the transactions between your web browser and the web application, you can use things like proxies, right? And there are many different types of proxies, out there in the industry. There are commercials, there are open source. One that is really, really popular is the Burp Suite proxy. And you actually find it in the web application analysis section here, and you see Burp Suite. And there's another one that is completely open source that is actually donated or created rather by the folks within OWASP. And it's an OWASP project. It's one of the most popular OWASP projects. It's called the OWASP Z-Attack Proxy, or ZAP. And basically they are similar tools, if you will. Now, Burp Suite comes in 2 different versions. There's a community edition, which is the one that actually comes with Kali Linux, and there's also a professional version. But let's actually go over the community edition, right? So in this case, I launch a burp, and then of course it's actually asking you if you want to update. In my case, I will update a little bit later, but For this purpose, any of the current versions or the latest versions will work for this example. Now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temporary project. I'm going to click on next, and then I'm going to start burp with all the defaults. And again, this is a community edition, and Burp Suite is created by a company called Pursuiger. And of course I want for you to upgrade to the professional. In this case, I'm not going to upgrade, and all the attacks that we're going to be doing can be done with the free community edition of Burp, right? Now, one thing that we have to do is to configure our browser to be able to send all the transactions to the web application, but to be able to send it to the proxy. Now, one thing that we have to do is configure our browser to send the transactions between the web browser and the application to the proxy. So to do that, you can click on the the menu or the menu icon to the right of the browser, and then click on Preferences. Then in there, go all the way to the bottom, and then go to Network Settings. And then here you can click Manual Proxy Configuration. In my case, I already had 127.0.0.1 on port 8080, and that's the default port that Burp Suite will actually listen to. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Burp Suite, you see down below that the proxy and the event log has a message called proxy, and then proxy service started on 127.0.0.1, so our loopback address on port 8080. So if I go back to the preferences, then you see that I'm matching that in there. Now, another thing is that you do not want to proxy for 127.0.0.1, right? So there's this section here down below that you should leave empty, right? So if you had in there something like localhost or 127.0.0.1, down below here, you will remove it. So in this case, we actually have it completely empty. Once we're done, we're going to click OK. And then now all the transactions between the web browser and the Burp Suite will be collected. Now I'm going to show you a quick trick, because in some cases, even if you configure your web browser to send the transactions, in many cases you will not be able to capture. This is actually a bug that I have found, and is somewhat inconsistent. And basically, in some cases, if you go to 127.0.0.1, and let's say I'm going to go to About Us, you see that I'm able to still be able to go there, and there's nothing in Burp Suite under proxy, right? Even though we have intercept on. And by the way, you have to make sure that intercept is on if you want to be able to capture the transactions between your web browser and the web application. Now let's actually look for our IP address, and we did that before with the IP command. And basically what I'm doing is IP-C for color and brief for brief, and then the letter A to see all the different interfaces. And the IP address that we have in Ethernet 0 is 10.6.6.104. So if I go to the web browser and I type 10.6.6.104, now you see that I'm able to collect the transactions, right? So from now on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to still point to the IP address of my interface versus 127.0.0.1. All right, so you see that now I'm able to intercept all transactions. I'm going to turn off intercept for now, so I can navigate back to the Contact Us page. In there, I'm going to type a comment. This is a comment. And then I'm not going to do anything for rating. Well, actually, I'm going to select at least 1 star in there so we can have an input. But then you see that we have a CAPTCHA that we have to solve, And in this case, 9 times 7 minus 4, that is 59. And then we click submit. Actually, let's go to Burp Suite first and make sure, you go right here, make sure that intercept is on. So we want to intercept that transaction. And then I'm going to click on submit. And then down here, you actually see that we have the comment. This is a comment, rating 1, and the CAPTCHA, that we solved. And then you have a CAPTCHA ID. What if we actually change this instead of a 1 to a 0, just like the exercise, says, and then we forward that to the application, right? And then we continue to forward so the page is actually populated. If we go back, you actually see that we successfully solved a challenge and we were able to give a 0-star feedback to the store. Now, a few things to highlight about burp and, I guess this vulnerability, right? Burp allows you to modify anything within a transaction, right? Between your web browser and the application, right? It also allows you, and I'm going to turn off intercepting here for a second, but it allows you to also go to the history of all the different transactions. So if I wanted to go here to socket.io, and you see that I have different parameters that I can edit. Actually, I can edit anything, that I want in here, but specific parameters that I want to edit, those are highlighted in red, right? And as a matter of fact, the tool itself will have a check mark in the params column to highlight all the different transactions that you can probably, manipulate different fields, right? And later, you're going to be learning on how to manipulate other fields and send, these transactions to other tools within Burp Suite, like the intruder, the repeater, sequencer, decoder. For example, if we wanted to actually decode something in here, we can actually send this to the decoder, and automatically, it will send whatever we highlighted to this decoder. And this one actually allows you to decode it as plain text, URI, base64, and many different other types of encoding methodologies, right? And encoding methods. Now let's go back to the scoreboard. And in this case, you see that we actually solved pretty much all of the level 1 exercises. And basically, there's a few others that we can practice. The confidential document, so accessing a confidential document. So let's see how we do that. One of the things as a pen tester that you want to do is interact with the application as much as possible, right? And as a matter of fact, it looks like we're not logged in again. So let me actually log in once again to the application. And now what I would like to do is just navigate to the application and see how it behaves, right? So, I can add any items to my, they call it a basket, but, my shopping cart. If I go to my basket in here, you actually see that the device or the application, has an item in here. If I want to check out, right, you see that now we have pretty ugly, but, a summary of the order that we actually are placing, right? And of course, this is fictitious. We don't have a credit card. It's not going to a payment processing activity and so on. So one of the things that you want to do is pay attention to where you're actually being redirected and all the different types of transactions that the applications is perhaps doing in the backend. But one of the easy things that you can see is actually just looking at the URL that you're being redirected to. And as you can see, this is a PDF that is now on a different directory, and in this case, the FTP directory. So we didn't know that this existed before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explore if I can see the files in that root folder for FTP. So if I hit enter, wow, now we actually see that we have several files in here that we can actually see arbitrarily that a user should not be able to see. So if I go to acquisitions MD and let's actually open the file, you see that this is actually plan acquisition. This document is confidential, do not distribute. So now we're actually able to access, confidential files. Of course, this is too easy. We're still in the 1-star category, right? So if we go back to the Juice Shop, you see that we're actually able to solve not only the confidential document, but we also looked at or provoked an error whenever we actually went back and to the FTP site or FTP directory rather. Let's solve the last item that we have here in the scoreboard for 1 star. And then next week we will actually solve many other different exercises in the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 star categories, right? But let's go over this one. So the one that we have left is saying, let us redirect you to a donation site that went out of business, right? Typically, donation sites are, or donations are typically asked in checkouts, right? Whenever you're trying to check out a specific item in, let's say, Amazon.com, eBay, whatever the case might be, right? So in this fictitious application, we actually already have an item in the basket, right? So what we can do is that we can inspect all these different elements for payments. We see here coupon, and you see PayPal, credit card, Bitcoin, Dash, Ether, or Ethereum, and many other ones in here. However, it's supposed to be a hidden one that went out of business. So we can do a few things. We can start actually interacting with the application and then intercept the packets using Burp Suite, or we can also inspect the element here or do an inspection and then try to figure out, what other type of redirects, may be actually present. So here you see redirect to a GitHub, repository. However, we already know that we have a GitHub, link on the top of the window, so that's not the one, right? But what if we actually type here redirect, and then we look for other ones? And by the way, there you go. You actually see that there's an href, so a link to redirect to gratipay.com/juice shop. And to edit in here, we can go to the div of the page and then edit as HTML. And you see that now we are able to take out the comment as such. And then where we close it in here, we take it out. And now you should be able to see another donation site in here. And there you go. There's a button called Gratipay. So if I click on that, now of course it's actually sending me to this warning page. Is because actually I have Burp Suite running and I have my proxy or configuration in my browser, right? And as you see here, as a matter of fact, I'm going to take advantage of this to highlight a few things whenever you're working with proxies, and specifically in this case Burp Suite. For going to, in this case, a redirect to an HTTPS site, basically the browser, in other words, Firefox in here needs a certificate authority root certificate for Portswigger. And Portswigger is actually the company that creates Burp Suite. So to avoid this, of course, I can actually install the certificate from Portswigger. That's actually the correct way of actually doing this. But for this purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my proxy configuration for now. And then I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to refresh that. And of course, it's going to Gratipay 44. But if I go back to Juice Shop, you see that I was actually able to solve the challenge, right? So now if I go back to the scoreboard, you see all the tier 1 or 1 star, in other words, challenges being solved. Now, as I mentioned to you, in the following video, we will actually go and solve several other items or challenges in all the other categories, all the way to 6 star. So of course, stay tuned. Hope you actually had a lot of fun walking you through this video, and see you in the next one.